right, welcome back, fifth graders. Today we are going to be kind of exploring and playing around with watercolor pencils and being inspired by our Georgia O'Keeffe piece. Last time we explored the idea of a value scale or a value chart, going from a tint, which is white with a color, to the hue, the pure color, to adding black to creating a shade. So hopefully you have two of these so that you can kind of play around with that idea of value. And we use values to create form. In a flat two-dimensional piece, the more value you add to your artwork, the more it looks like it's going to have some form. So I think we're going to try and use these watercolor pencils because they're kind of fun and easy kind of to control. So for this, once you draw your piece onto your watercolor paper, and again I went with sunflowers, and the idea with Georgia O'Keeffe is that you have to be big and you want them to either show overlap and have a little bit of overlap here and or off the page. So you can see I went off the page. And then think about your colors. The watercolor pencils are set up at the front of the room and also over by the sink. You're going to need a bucket of water, a paper towel, and one clean paintbrush, okay? Pick the colors that you want. So again, I'm working with sunflower, so I'm going to go with oranges and yellows. And then also think about the color you're going to use for your shade. For the tint, we're just going to try and go lighter with our color. We could try and add white and see what happens. I didn't grab a white pencil, but that might be a good fun thing to do. So on this one, I added black for my shade, but on this one I used purple, and I really like purple or blue as a nice cool color for shade. Black is really powerful, and I think sometimes it kind of takes over your piece. So with that in mind, I'm going to do another petal. So several ways of working with these watercolor pencils. You could dip your brush and get it wet and place water, just clean water, where you want to work with your watercolor pencil. So my paper has water on it. I'm going to leave my brush down so that it doesn't get funky in the water. And then I'm going to start with my shade. So I'm going to use purple. And with this, and again, before you start working, because once the lead gets soft, it's hard to sharpen, is look at your pencils before you do, and then sharpen them a little bit. They don't need to be really sharp because it makes them weak. So just kind of sharpen them a little bit. So now my paper is wet, and I'm going to lay in my shade, or what I'm going to use to create a shade. So if you have too much water on your paper, it's going to go really, it's going to spread. So I kind of almost have too much water on my paper. So with a paper towel, and I would have maybe two, you can see it's bleeding into the next area. You can kind of tap it down. So I'm going to remove some of that water. But what would really work to keep that water in place is using an oil pastel. So with an oil pastel, the oil pastel will stop the water from bleeding into another area. You just don't want to smear it. So I'm going to outline everything with a nice black oil pastel. And really you should do this first. And that should keep the oil pastel from bleeding over. So I have my shade down, and now I'm going to use orange. So one way of putting it was just put water down. Another way of using the watercolor pencils is to dip them in the water, and you'll see that it's got some water on it, and then it works into liquid. So now I'm blending my orange into the purple, and I'm going really lightly. I'm not pushing down hard because I want it to blend. I'm letting the water help get the color flowing. And you can also use your brush. Again, your brush shouldn't be too wet. So I know it's clean. I'm tapping it on my paper towel. I can see my brush is clean. I'm going to make sure I have a lot of the excess water off. And then I'm going to just blend these two. Really lightly. I'm just really lightly touching the paper. And I can even spread it up into the tip where I really want it to be more of a tint or lighter in color. So again, I'm going to clean this Get the extra off, lay it down, it's clean. And now I'm going to use it's kind of a yellowish orange, but again I'm going to tap it down and then blend it into the top. So again, the idea is to have a nice value scale going from light to dark. Now you could try and make it curved, and so you could bring some of the dark maybe up onto the edge. So I've showed you that you could wet the paper to work with your watercolor pencil, that you could dip your watercolor marker, the watercolor pencil into the water to get it wet. Don't leave them in there because then it dissolves. And then the other way of using the watercolor pencil is dry. So I've got a dry watercolor pencil. I'm going to outline this area first with black, and maybe the next one. Okay. And now with a dry watercolor pencil, I'm going to lay down some color. So it's like using a regular colored pencil. And I'm kind of going lightly. And then with my paintbrush, I'm going to get my paintbrush wet, tap off some of the extra water, tap it onto my paper towel so it's not too wet, and then blend it. So it turns that colored pencil into a watercolor material. Okay. Clean my brush, make sure it's dry. So you can see my paper towel isn't full of a lot of color because my brush is clean. I'm going to go back to this method of using a wet color. I need it to be more wet. And I'm going lightly, so I'm putting my orange down. And then getting my brush, again a little bit of water, we don't need a lot of water, making sure it's dry, so you notice I'm getting off all the extra water from my brush. And now really lightly pulling that orange into the purple. And then really lightly, I'm pulling it to the tip. So it's a little kind of dark for me, but oh well. I think it looks really pretty. So clean my brush so that it's ready for the next time, lay it down, and now I'm going to finish with my yellow. Since my paper's a little wet, you can see that it turned right to watercolor. So I'm really loving it. I really love the purple and how it really adds really well with the orange and the yellow. And this was again the black, so I wasn't really a fan of the black. Again, I always say black is a really powerful color, and it is, so you have to use it really carefully. So have fun trying to work with our watercolor pencils using the 3 techniques of either water down first. So one more time, water down first, and again, don't use a lot of water. If you see pools of water, kind of blot up some of that water. My paper towel was wet. And then laying in the colored pencil, so that's one way. The other way is getting your watercolor pencil wet. Now this is kind of short, so I'm going to carefully sharpen it, maybe just 2 turns. Laying it down dry, and then adding wet to it. Again, not a lot of water, and blending. And again, I'm going really lightly with my paintbrush. I'm just dancing on top of the surface. And then the last way of working with these is to dunk your color into the water. So it's paper wet, pencil wet, or paper and pencil dry, and then add wet. So 3 different ways. And when you do that, you'll notice a different intensity of color. Usually you get a more intense color if you get your pencil wet and the paper is dry. If you want a light intense color, then you're going to do your pencil dry and add just a little bit of water. had too much purple on there. And if you add just a little bit of water, it's going to be very, very light. And we can use the white of the paper as our tint. So you don't always have to add white. In fact, in watercolor techniques, a lot of times you use the white of the paper as your tint. So have fun exploring the watercolor pencils and working with your Georgia O'Keeffe inspired artwork.